Welcome back. Today we're working on the dirt pile block, and this one's a really fun one because it's not a vehicle or a tool, it's just a pile of dirt, but it's what makes it great. It breaks up the whole look of the quilt and gives it a real construction site feel. It's the easiest of the larger blocks in the series, so if you've already made the traffic cone, the hammer, or the hard hat, you're going to fly through this one. And if it's your very first block, welcome. You picked a great place to start, and let's get into it. Before we get sewing, you'll want to get your pattern pieces taped together and colored in. You need to print out your pattern pages. We use newsprint paper, and you'll want to make sure that you're printing it at 100%, and there's also a 1-inch square to make sure that your sizing is correct. You will lay out your pieces, line them up by the edges where they connect, tape them together on the back so your front stays clean and easy to read. Then you're going to grab your colored pencils or markers and color in each section. The dirt pile block is pretty straightforward. You'll likely only be working with 2 different colors, so this step goes by really quickly. Just make sure any sections that are the same fabric get the same color so you can see at a glance what goes where before you start cutting. And then once you're taped and colored, you are ready to sew. I'm going to start with this section, the biggest one. I have placed my first piece of fabric at the number 1 and pinned it there so it doesn't slide around. It's pretty sides facing out so that when I do number 2, my second piece of fabric, you do pretty sides facing each other. You line that up against the line, and then you're going to sew right across that black line there, and making sure that you're as accurate as possible. When you fold it out, you want to make sure that it is covering that whole piece of number 2. You're going to set your seams by pressing them down, and then you can move on to number 3. Part of the prep includes folding back your pattern on that line and then trimming the excess fabric. This is helpful for 2 reasons. First, it reduces bulk, but then it also will give you a nice line to line your fabric up on the other side, just like this. So you're going to do pretty sides together, and then you're going to line it up along that fabric. You're going to make sure that when you fold that fabric back, it's going to cover that entire piece, which this is good. So right along that black line, it's really important that you follow that line on that pattern as close as possible, especially because we have multiple sections that we're going to connect. All right, we're just double checking we've got everything covered, which we do. So I am going to, I pressed it, and now I'm going to fold that pattern back and then trim off the excess fabric there, giving yourself a 1/4 inch seam allowance as you're trimming. I'm using an add a quarter ruler, which is really helpful. I've linked it below if you are interested in getting one yourself. Not a requirement, but it's really nice to be able to just kind of lock that on your piece of paper and start trimming. All right, so we've got our 3 pieces here. We're going to move on to number 4. And again, we're going to take that piece of fabric and do like side or pretty sides together. And then this gets kind of tricky when you have the big pieces, so you want to make sure they don't slip. But you're going to sew right across that line, press your seams, and then we're going to flip that pattern back over and trim around so we don't have a bunch of excess fabric there. All right, now we are moving on to our next piece here. Again, we're going to place your fabric pretty sides together, lining it up with that fabric that you just trimmed. Making sure that you're lining it up there, and then when you fold it out, it's going to cover that piece. And then sew right along that black line. After you're done with that, you're going to set your seams and press your fabric so it's nice and flat. This is helpful so that you don't get any puckering or creases when you are sewing your pieces together. And then we're going to fold that pattern back and give ourselves that seam allowance with that add a quarter ruler, and then reduce some bulk. All right, moving right along, we're going to do the exact same process with this next piece. I'm going to lay that down and just double check when I fold that out that it is going to cover our piece, which we are set there. So I'm going to line that up and sew right along that black line, making sure that I am as accurate as possible on that line. fold that out, crease it with our iron. We want to make sure you don't pull the seams open with your iron, that you're forcing things open or you're going to start seeing your thread through your fabric. You want to make sure you press it and crease it and then set it without using a lot of force or just tugging at the fabric. And then again, we're going to pull back our pattern and cut back that excess bulk. Foundation paper piecing is a very repetitive process. At points it becomes like meditative because you set your fabric, pretty sides together, sew along the line, set your seams, sew, trim bulk, repeat. It's a really fun process once you get the hang of it, because again, you can get in that like zen-like state where you're just kind of going through the motion, and before you know it, you've created a masterpiece. Alright, so we've trimmed back our excess here. We're going to make sure that we are pressing our seams so it folds nice and straight. We'll move on to our last little detail before we get to the sides to finish off this section. Alright, I've made sure that the fabric is big enough, the piece-wise. We sewed across there, cut off our excess, and we are good to go on the other two sides. When I have sides like this on a section where it's just, finishing things off and they're two straight lines, I will actually set my fabric and pin it, and then sew along the line, and then set the other side pin, or before I sew it, I'll pin them both and then sew across the lines, knowing that they're not going to move, and then I'll do all of my trimming and everything together at the same time. Alright, so we finished that section, and now we are going to move on to this smaller section here. I'm going to show you me adding my first piece of fabric here, making sure that it is going to have at least 1/4 of an inch all the way around, which this one's good, and then pin that on there. Again, pretty sides are facing away from the paper, so the pretty side is facing towards the table, and the rest of the time they're going to be facing the opposite way. So we've got section number 2, and again, now we're doing pretty sides facing the paper or pretty sides together, right? And then we're going to make sure that as we have that lined up on that fabric, that it is going to cover everything when I fold it back. So we are good to go. So I'm going to sew it along that line. There we go, as precise as possible, and then we will fold that fabric back. Press our seams and trim our excess. It's helpful too, once you have number 1 set, that you work all the way around it to clean up all that excess, so as you're working through your pattern, it's all cleaned up. That's personal preference, you could do it as you go, but that's something that I like to do just so I can see it visually taking shape. Alright, for number 3, we're going to do pretty sides together. You're going to line that fabric up with the line that you just created by giving yourself a seam allowance. So right across that line, and then you are going to press and reduce your bulk. Give yourself a seam allowance and trim. This one had kind of a weird scrap left over, but I didn't want to cut it apart until I knew for sure it would fit. So that's why I have a big square on there. But I know that I can just trim off that excess, and then I minimize waste. If that's something that you also like to do, then it's a great way to do a piece like this where you have a big scrap, but it's kind of wonky and you have to sew down the middle. Alright, again, pretty sides together. I ran out of scraps, so I had to pull out my bigger piece of fabric. And I personally just like to sew that big piece so I know I'm not creating more scraps. I know some people like to pre-cut. It's a personal preference, just making sure that you have a seam allowance all the way around. All right, we're going to trim this up. Make sure everything is pressed and straight. As we move to this next piece here, we only have 3 more pieces. Pretty sides together, line that up with your line. So right across that pattern, line as accurate as possible. Pull that out, make sure it covers your piece that you're doing, and we are good. So we're going to set our seams and trim our fabric. All right, all we have left are the 2 end pieces. These are very similar to the last block section. So I am going to lay my fabric out on each side, pretty sides together, and then I just pin them in place so that I can sew both seams at the same time. And then I will press them and trim up the edges, and then we can get to the assembly of this block. All right, and now we have done all the piecing part of this block. Now we just need to do the assembly and connect the 2 together. This block is really nice because there's only 2 sections that you need to connect, but you do need to be mindful that you are connecting them with the 2 intersecting points to help it make it look like a continuous image rather than 2 sections put together. That is where foundation paper piecing can fall apart if you're not mindful of those 2 points to make sure that you're lining them up perfectly while you're pinning them together and assembling. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. We've got this section, and then we have our second section that we just finished. And you can see here at the top and the bottom that these dirt pieces need to be matching up. So I'm going to put these together, pretty sides together, and I'm going to pay special attention to these 2 points on either side, making sure that they're perfectly matched up, and then clip those together. Those 2 points are my biggest priority, again, because this can make or break the image for making it look like one continuous line versus 2 pieces together and it's not the same. I'm going to open it up and check it before I sew anything and make sure that those line up well. And I'm happy with that, so I am going to sew them together. And that's the dirt pile block. I love this block because it's one of those ones that are deceptively simple but make such a big difference in the finished quilt. It breaks up all the vehicles and tools and gives the whole thing that real construction site feel. So don't sleep on the dirt pile, it really adds a lot. Now that you've got it done, you're building up a really solid collection. If you're working through the full series, the vehicles are waiting for you, the cement mixer, dump truck, front loader, excavator, and all of them use the same foundation paper piecing skills you just practiced, so you're more than ready. If you want the pattern for the dirt pile or the construction site bundle, the links to the Etsy shop are down in the description below. If this tutorial helped you, I'd love a thumbs up. It really does help other quilters find these videos. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the other block tutorials coming up. I'd love to see your finished block, so if you make this one, drop a photo in the comments or tag us. Seriously, it makes our day. All right, happy quilting everyone. We'll see you in the next one.